Welcome to another episode of RTAF Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Norris, and thanks for being here. This week we've got Birdcap. He's a muralist. He lives in Memphis, Tennessee, and we chat about advice for anyone wanting to get into creating murals, the most important ingredient for his success, and a couple of his projects, one of which is the Grief Manual, which depicts in kind of comic book panel fashion what it's like to go through grief. All the emotions are included, and I thought it was an awesome document. So we chat about that a little bit, and we talk about AI and the future of the art world. So yeah, it's a great episode. Also, got to give a shout out to Tom Pink. Thanks for coming back to the Patreon. Great to have you back, man. If you would like to support this podcast directly, you can head on over to patreon.com/RTAF podcast, and there you'll find tiers of support ranging from $4 to $16 a month. And a great way to support without giving up any money is to head on over to the YouTube, or if you're here right now on YouTube, and smash that subscribe button. That helps me tremendously. And if you're listening on audio podcast platforms, give us a 5-star rating, wouldn't you? Write a nice review. All right. Anyway, let's jump right into the episode. Thanks again for being here. I think you guys will really enjoy this one. Shouts.
Got it.
And then I do a little clap so that I can find my way in editing. Birdcap, what up, dude? Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Of course, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Before we started, you were talking about, how your day's going. You said it's kind of a chill, relaxing day, and that you're ready to have like a busy day soon.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
I think most people who do freelance, it feels feast or famine. Either you're over encumbered and you're juggling too much, or you're juggling nothing at all, and you're just like, what's going on? So right
Yeah.
now, I'm in one of those really like lax years, to be honest. It just hasn't been a whole lot popping off. Luckily, I got a solo show coming up, so with all the free time, I've just sort of buried into that. But yeah, I wouldn't mind being a little more hectic. I took like a hour-long walk today.
Oh, wow. That can be good, I guess, sometimes, but if you're needing the work, it's always like you're just sort of walking, waiting for someone to give you a text or a call.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's always awkward to talk about too, because like I think we carry ourselves as a brand, so you don't want to say anything that could damage the brand. So if anyone asks you how you're doing, you're like, I'm doing great. I have a
Yeah.
email chain with Nike out right now. Don't worry
Nice.
about me, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you're like, man, I've been playing too much Madden, and I need to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that, man, the just sort of presenting a strong front in the art world is just, you don't want to get into it with everybody either.
It's true. It's true. I don't know why that is. And in general, I think there's this tendency to be opaque in the art world. So I know a
Yeah.
lot of people are very reticent to tell you like how they do their pricing or how they like do square footage on a mural, if they do daily rates or all this stuff that it really helps to know each other's numbers and we can like kind of grow together. But I think it's getting better. But I remember when I first entered the game, like everyone was like, dude, that's like asking me about like my sex life with my wife. Don't you dare. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Do you wish people are a little bit more open about that kind of stuff sometimes?
I think we're, I think the people around me are getting pretty good at it or are good at it, I should
Hmm.
say. Oh, I wanted to shout out. I was going through your list and you've talked to a good deal of my friends from Detour
Yeah.
to Chelsea,
Hmm.
um, Allie, a lot of good Denver folks out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Shouts
Yeah,
to them for
I
sure.
want to say them. They're really good at talking about business with you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Detour, just to name one. I mean, he's like an encyclopedia of knowledge, and like his Art Tip Tuesdays are always incredible.
Yeah,
You know.
he's a great dude. Oh, I should also say Hyro. What's up to Hyro? I saw he was on your
Hell yeah,
list.
yeah,
Yeah, he's cool people too, man.
for sure, for sure. Um, so we kind of started in sort of the business realm, I guess, a little bit, but let me take it back to a question I like to ask people that usually renders some pretty interesting results. Artists, we tend to be sort of, I don't know, at least a lot of artists view themselves as outcasts or socially awkward or whatever. Were you a weird kid growing up?
Uh, I don't know. Probably. I mean, I was like a chubby redhead in like a mostly black school.
Hmm.
Um, so I definitely felt a little weird. And it was like endorsed by the way people treated me, I'm sure.
True.
Um, but I don't know, man. I think you go through different periods. I think in certain groups, I'm very outgoing and a bit of an extrovert. And
Hmm.
then you put me in like the another group and I'm like bearing down into my sketchbook and afraid to make eye contact. So it's just context. I think you find your home and you're outgoing. You don't find your home and you're like listening.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think the human brain is trained to, look for danger, and if you don't feel comfortable, it's sort of sending these signals of like, look out, be on the lookout. Um, yeah. So do you remember if there was a time or a moment when you knew that you were an artist or that you wanted to be an artist?
Um, yeah, I have a couple specific. I was going to this public school and I applied to go to this art school, art high school. It would take you away for junior and senior year. And I went for writing, creative writing. I wanted to be like I don't know what most like loners, 16-year-olds want to be. So like a poet or a philosopher, some great money-making job like that. And I got to the school and they couldn't afford to open up the writing program. So they're like, you got in, but you need to pick between theater, vocal, or visual art. I chose visual art because the other two was just like way too outgoing, way too extroverted,
Sure.
and uncomfortable. And at that time, like I only really drew in math class and I drew Ninja Turtles and like Boba Fett and stuff. But that
Nice.
school, you know, without it being like too cliche, it changed my life. It really got me into the arts, made me pursue it in college, and it was like no looking back from there. But I had no interest in being a visual artist until I went to it was called the Mississippi School of Arts.
Nice. So you grew up in Mississippi.
Yep.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, it's often the case, I find, at least definitely for myself. It's like sort of events just happen, right? And then all of a sudden or so one can just be sort of pushed gently into something that they hadn't planned on, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, like what you choose is almost arbitrary. Like I decided to go into painting and now I've been painting for 20 years, but it could have been clarinet, it could have been construction work. I think
Yeah.
we need a rock to tie a string around. There's that They Might Be Giant song.
Mhm.
But that always like struck a chord with me. We just need something to give us gravity and to like propel us forward and like to make sense why we're laying string and why we're laying time. And so like I happened to choose art, but it was, it was a wild dice roll that is it. And it wouldn't really matter if I had become a computer programmer or a politician or like a ditch
Right, yeah.
digger.
Do you think that your sort of DNA is more on the creative side though, rather than like, looking at spreadsheets or
I'm
whatever.
definitely bad at paperwork.
Yeah.
Um, I have like, and I'm working on it. Uh, like I go to therapy and take medicine to try to be better at emails. That's not the only thing therapy's for, but that's like
Right.
I,
Right.
I will strangely avoid something that requires 4 minutes of attention to sign.
Dude,
So
yeah.
like
I
that's
feel you.
probably not my strength naturally.
Hmm.
I don't know if creativity is. I think I do like um I like craft a whole lot.
Hmm.
And so like I think that's the part I really get into with visual arts. It's like there's a diary side to it and then there's like a craft that accompanies it. So you get this like creative spurt, but then you get a whole lot of structure around it. Like I can't just like spill onto a page. The way I draw is very like procedural
Sure.
and incremental. So I think I'm somewhat creative, but I'm not like the loosest person in the world. And I really like admire artists who are like a little bit wilder when it comes to like how they express themselves visually.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for me personally, it's sort of been a journey from like being super loose and just trying to make something up on the spot, and then on the spot would turn into, weeks of painting.
Right.
But then like I've sort of realized that it's nice to have an idea that you can sort of impose on the 2D surface, you know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
Uh,
yeah.
I really like doing mosaics this year because mosaics, the you do your whole creative process on the front end.
Yeah.
You get your idea, your concept, you draw the sketch. And then for the next 2 weeks, it's sort of just like pecan cracking. Like you're just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
breaking stones, gluing, laying. You can watch the entire season of Sopranos while you do it. But
Yeah.
it's just like labor. And I think growing up in the South, there was always a part of me that like to legitimize my art, subconsciously always needed it to be laborious. I think that's why I like murals. I think that's why I like mosaics. That's why I like tedium because it's not fun. And then when I go home, I can be like, oh, I worked. I like,
Right, yeah. Yeah, definitely murals will make you feel like you worked. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. A ladder will make you feel something.
Yeah, yeah. You're like, I'm a blue collar guy. Yeah, man.
Yeah. And that was my upbringing. My dad worked in construction, and then my first job was ditch digging in Mississippi for a plumbing company. So they'd use big backhoes to get down pretty low, but then the last like 4 or 5 feet, you'd have to hand dig because you don't want to break the pipe.
Right. You gotta be more
And
precise.
um, and that was sort of my like introduction to work. But there were things I really loved about that job because I went home and I was like, I did a day. Like I felt tired.
Yeah.
And I think studio practices are really hard for me sometimes because you're left with a ton of energy after the day. And so it's hard to settle
Hmm.
down. It doesn't feel like you've done enough, even though you have. And so you start making mistakes in the studio because you have more energy than you have brain left.
Hmm.
And that's what I love about murals is murals, you go on site, you work, you're tired, so you go home.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
there's a definite point in mural making versus studio work where you're like, not only is your brain tired, but you get the signal from your body, and there's no doubting that it's like, okay, it's time to stop.
yeah. I used to love that when I would before my dad passed, I'd always call him when I was packing up out of a job. But it was a way we could connect because I could tell him, this is how much the supplies are costing. This is the kind of rig we're going to have to rent for the wall. It was made out of this material, so it took up so much more paint. He wasn't an expert on painting, but he did understand job sites, and so
For sure.
it was a way we could really relate. Um, but yeah, man, I love murals. They're the best of both worlds.
Yeah. How did you get into making murals? I went pretty deep on your Instagram the other day. It looks like sort of close to the beginning you were already painting on walls. Or at
Yeah,
least
well,
the beginning of your Instagram.
I was late. I got an Instagram because I started painting on walls pretty much.
Okay, nice.
Um, it was, I was living in South Korea teaching art in English to like Korean elementary students.
Nice.
And I had lived there like 4 years, and I was just seeing all this like awesome street art. And I was like, I'll never get to meet these people. And
Mm.
I decided to Google one of the names, and I found her Facebook like, instantly. And I was like, oh, so they're not like anonymous mythologies, they're like businesses. So I messaged her in like my most formal Korean, and she responded in perfect English, just being like, let's get dumplings later. And I was like, okay.
Nice.
And she took me out and, kind of gave me the breakdown on how to. Her name was Junk House, by the way. Junk House taught me how to paint a wall, basically, gave me the skeleton frame of it at least, and gave me my first like practice with some spray cans and showed me how to change nozzles, and um, that kind of set it off. Once I started doing that there, I was like, oh, this is incredible. And I was just working for the weekends. I'd work Monday through Friday teaching, and then I'd spend my own money, go to abandoned building with my own paint all weekend, and take a photo. And that photo was just to impress like six people, like
Yeah,
the
sure.
other people who I knew who did this. And if they liked that photo, then I was like soaring. And if they didn't like that photo, then it was a waste. It was all, I just wanted to be a part of this community more than anything. Like I really looked up to Junk House. I looked up to Art Time Joe, J Flow, Six Coin, Duff Smells Good, all these Korean street artists. And so that was my whole point for, I would say, like a year. And I didn't think it could ever be a career, which I think also made it liberating because it was so like, it was entirely a passion project. It was like kind of just
Yeah.
before the big mural wave hit. And I was in Korea where there wasn't a lot of murals. And so it was very much just this like misfit gang of like romantics.
Hell
And
yeah.
so being just wanting to be a part of them, that's kind of what got me started. And then when I came back to the States, my dad had heart surgery, so I came back home to be
Hmm.
there for him. I just kept painting, and then it's kind of avalanched into like, oh, you can make money. That's awesome. You can have a career of it. Okay.
Nice.
Um, but it was all sort of by accident because at first I was just trying to impress like four people, and it accidentally became a career.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's nice to start off in that pure space too. Like pure headspace about it at least.
It is. I think you're always chasing that for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, how do you manage that? Do you have any routines or anything that you do day to day to sort of bring your mind back to that space?
I try to um I try to keep a freestyle practice. So like for a commission job, obviously I want to do the best thing I can, and that requires sketching and articulating as much as possible to the client. And
Hmm.
but I try not to forget that like what I really want to do is like impress like six people. And those six people can change, but I always try to keep six people or so on a pedestal. And that way, if like I get like 100 likes on Instagram or something pitiful, it doesn't hurt me as much as if I get these six likes. And so
Right, yeah.
like I'm going this weekend to go paint trains,
Nice.
and if those trains get painted and like the people I want to see it and they like it, then that'll be paying it back to the person who started this career, who's like not me anymore.
Right,
Um,
yeah.
but I try to keep that. I try to keep some purity in the art form, which sounds like grossly like saccharine, but like I do like the idea of painting to impress, to stay in my community and not painting just for the career.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I could see that, that could go both ways. Like, if you don't get those 6 likes, it sometimes isn't due to what you made, It's like sometimes the algorithm just refuses to show your stuff to certain
Well,
people
I
for
know,
whatever
but when I'm
reason.
talking about these six people, I'm not relying on Instagram. I'm like texting them a photo of
Oh,
like
I see, I
I
see, I
painted
see.
this in the trade yard, and if they send me a thumbs up, I'm like, if they send me like a little bit more, I'm like, I did it,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. Um, but
Does
that
it Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I don't know what I was gonna say.
Yeah. Does that make it feel does that it's almost like you're like you said, you're staying true to that person that you were. Almost it's almost like an inner child, although I don't know when you started making art. Now we're bouncing around all over the place, but when was that?
I mean, didn't Picasso have some quote that like every child makes art, and the trick is to continue making art into
Yeah, yeah.
adulthood, or something? I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing. But I've always been drawing. I went to that high school again when I was like 16 maybe, and I got into street art probably when I was about 26, so 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Other than Junk House, did you have any mentors that you consider like someone that was there for you, sort of like showing you the ropes along the way?
Absolutely. I've never said it out loud that he was a mentor, but I could think of him as one. Nosy 42 is a
Mm-hmm.
Memphis muralist and graffiti writer, but he took me to my first train yard. He like really worked with me to like help me improve my spray paint. And when I first came to the city, I wasn't verified at all. So like
Right. Yeah.
I had all this work in Korea, but I had no work in the States. And him painting with me and collabing with me a lot in my early career, I think like he co-signed me in a way to where like the entire graffiti scene sort of like allowed me in.
Yeah.
So definitely big shout out to Nosy 42.
Hell yeah. So I don't really have any experience in terms of the graffiti scene. Um, and you said he sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but sort of grandfathered you in and made it chill for you to be there, I guess. What's that
Yeah.
scene like, if you could
In,
describe it?
in Tennessee, it's pretty chill in general. We have a lot of walls and not a huge population of writers.
Mm-hmm.
There's exceptions, things happen. But here it's pretty chill. A lot of train painters here, a lot of train yards that are easier to paint in than say in like Denver and Chicago.
Yeah.
So it's a big part of the culture here. Um, but it's less like it's not like they would necessarily have done anything to my murals anyway, but it was
Mm-hmm.
just like having that confidence to know like, when I met Nosy, Nosy became one of the six. I keep saying six like there's a real number, but there's no real number.
Yeah,
But he
yeah,
became somebody who it was important for me to get validation from.
for sure.
Like I felt I was old coming into the scene. There's so many people who start street art when they're like 13 and 14. I
Yeah.
was like 26, so it meant a lot to me to to get approval and to feel like I was part of the scene. And then before you know it, you're like deeply entrenched in the scene and people look to you like you're the scene. And
Yeah.
that's an awesome feeling. But I think the sober part of me always feels like you have to continue to pay your dues. You're only like as validated as your last wall. You're only as validated as your last train.
You're only funky as your last cut.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely take that to heart too. And I think it's true, you know. That's the whole act of being an artist. You're sort of in this constant state of becoming.
Yeah.
Um,
Constant state of insecurity.
yeah, yeah. So you're talking about Memphis, and earlier talking about growing up in the South, in Mississippi. Did you feel like you needed to get out of Mississippi to maybe find a more creative environment, or was it
Not
accepted?
necessarily a more creative environment. I'd push back on that and say some of the most creative people I've ever met are in the Deep South. I think
Nice.
I think creativity it really breeds well. in the South, and a lot of that is because you don't have other things, and so you're forced to sort of create.
Yeah.
I definitely had to leave Mississippi economically. Like I wasn't ever going to
Yeah.
be a career muralist living in Mississippi. It's
Sure.
hard enough being a career muralist living in Memphis, which is a much bigger market than any place in Mississippi. But at least we have an airport that's nearby, and it's like easy enough to I can get to Denver and paint jobs. I can go to Chicago. Um, but no, I had a creative community in Mississippi, and I still do when I go. Jackson has a huge scene. It's really cool. A lot of cool people doing cool things. But yeah, I was never going to be able to build a life in Mississippi, and it's just because the state's so poor and it doesn't fund like creative arts
Right.
endeavors.
Right. Yeah, that's a I like that subtle frame shift that you just gave me there where it's not like there's not creative people there, but it's just that the opportunities in the market is not a place where you see or saw yourself thriving. Because I'm from Kentucky and I lived in a pretty big town, Lexington, but it's a very like genteel sort of like back when I was growing up there, like everything was about horse racing and bourbon and basketball, and there's nothing wrong with that, but like there wasn't like an art scene so much.
Right.
And I started way late. I think you said you were 26 when you started mural making. I was 26 when I started making art like seriously, not just doodling in
Yeah.
in on some lined paper. So yeah, I did that there for a couple years and then moved to Denver. And yeah, thank you for that frame shift because there's definitely like a creative community, musicians, artists. It just wasn't as what would you say like fermenting as like a place like Denver is.
Yeah. Denver is a special place, man. I would say there's few cities I know of that are even cities larger than Denver that can have that many working muralists pay rent.
Mhm.
Like it's an incredible city. I'm always super stoked when I get invited to come out for a job or for a festival. Um, a really special place. I think of it as a second home.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, I love it out here for sure. I actually live outside of Denver in a little town called Lafayette, but it's about 20, 30 minutes away.
All right, on.
Yeah.
Get better rent and still get all the opportunities.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
You
that's
you
good.
nailed it. Yeah. Do you have, if you can think of it, what might be a very important ingredient to have as an artist for success in the art game?
Um, that's a good question. Obviously, passion. You gotta like care enough to make it through dry spells, and you're gonna have a lot of dry spells at the very beginning of your career. I lived in a van for 2 years, so you have
Really?
to have like a silly amount of passion that borders on like foolish. And then I think the foresight to know that the scene is extremely small, and so you need to be extremely kind. It's
Yeah.
important to treat each artist like, you know, like they're worthy of a lot of dignity because like today you might be a bigger name than them and tomorrow they'll be a bigger name than you. And you
Yeah.
don't want to have hurt yourself or hurt them. You don't want to have stifled a career by being unkind to somebody. But it's a small scene, and if I've been in it 10 years now. I've seen things dramatically change with like where people's careers are and how explosive they can take off, how quickly they can crash. So be passionate and be humble and be kind. I think being kind will get you more jobs than being talented sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right?
It's also like, it's lonely in the studio. You want to make friends so you can collaborate on things. You want to have friends so you can like go to Denver and not just work at a job site. You can go hang out with Casey or Chelsea or Allie. You want to be able to like I don't know. It's hard enough as a human to not feel alone all the time. Like in the world we live in, we get this like Diet Pepsi version of socialization through our phone, but it's not necessarily the most like nutritious version.
Yeah.
The greatest asset of being an artist, especially in street art, I feel is the community surrounding it and the other artists.
Yeah.
So if you go to a festival and you like don't interact with anybody, I've seen like big artists go to festivals, not talk to anyone, and then go home. And then this is for like
Really?
unpaid festivals. Like I was in
Really?
Italy, and I this one artist came in. We were all hanging out. It was a great time, and he refused to meet with anybody. Did his wall, ate dinner in his room, blah blah blah. And he might have his own reasons, but in my head, it left me really like you're wasting the best bit because
Yeah.
the murals
Yeah.
will fade away. The job is not bringing you any income really, and then these friendships are what you get to take home. Like that's all you get, so don't
Yeah.
waste that.
Yeah, that's wild. That's a it's a bold move. Maybe he was going through something. I don't
He
know.
might have been.
I try to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes, but yeah, that's tough. That's a tough one. Was he
Yeah,
like a
and
bigger artist than everybody else or?
he was, if you're talking by like Instagram count, he was much bigger than everyone else.
Yeah, I think that shit can sometimes go to people's head, you know. But both in like the grandiose like I'm better than everybody way or like oh I don't have enough followers like I suck
Yeah,
way. And I think both are, it's we're living in a online we're living in like a funhouse mirror of who knows like socialization, I guess you would call it. And it's a distorted view of reality, I think.
it's true. It affects everybody pretty deeply too. I remember when I was in college, we used to say rich people talk about art and artists talk about money. And
Yeah.
nowadays it feels like artists talk about the algorithm. Like you get any of us alone for too long, and we all start like giving our theories, like crackpot theories on how to fix the algorithm, what's wrong with the algorithm. Like we
Yeah.
talk about it like it's like a mercurial god that controls our lives. Because it like the impact of it is so real. If I post something about my solo show and it's seen by 300 people, um, I'm going to be in such a mood. Like it
Yeah.
controls my mood, and it controls a lot of my friends' moods.
Yeah.
And I know there's no way to like work around it, but we decided to put the public square on a private entity. We all accepted that early on,
Yeah.
and we got a lot of bonuses from it. But now when this private entity acts like a for-profit business, we're all devastated. And it's like, yeah, well, we probably could have thought this out more, but here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't exactly up to us either. And I think we're, as artists or creatives, you're sort of stuck with what we have for right now in terms of like Instagram or Facebook, TikTok, whatever it is. And so, not that like we're working for Instagram, but, you know, in a way, it's a two-way street. Sometimes Instagram works for us, but like we're definitely giving them a lot of content uh, for free.
Ton of content. My entire career is available on Instagram.
Mine too.
And like the hot fingers I have when I have like a new photo and I'm just like, oh, I want to post it. I want to post it. I want to post it now. Like I feel like a crack addict. Like it's insane.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to be better about like just distancing myself from it um, because it affects my mood and like not in a
Yeah.
good way. I don't leave it super happy anymore. Like now I'm like, because I don't know, a couple years ago I had triple the interactions I get now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the only logical thing my brain comes up with is like, oh, you're really bad. You're bad at making things now. And you're like, oh, that's lame. And then I just blame algorithms. Like you just yell at God. You go, oh,
Yeah.
how dare you, God?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's really weird. They've sort of hijacked the way that we socialize and get validation and status and put it through this sort of ad model. and then that just distorts everything. And then, like you said, you it feels like, because our brains are so old and so used to living in, small tribes or whatever for however many hundreds of thousands of years, that it feels like you're being rejected by the tribe.
Yeah,
um
yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, it hurts my feelings.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I've noticed like the things I watch as a passive audience member aren't things where it's like the best art. I don't look at the best art, not for more than 2 seconds. I like them, I go, that's nice. And then I move past it. The thing I watch is like someone being like, here's a bucket full of crayons. I bet you don't. And then anything that's anticipatory, where I just have to see what
yeah,
the finish line is,
yeah,
I'll watch that forever. And because of that, the algorithm's like, he must really like this. He watched it
right,
for 2 minutes. He only looked at that good art for half a second. And
yeah.
so it's like I'm dooming myself. Like I'm the problem with the audience. I value anticipation models over like
Well, again, it's
good
it's
product.
it's just hacking just natural human tendencies, it's like,
Yeah,
the appreciation of art, I don't know how old that is in terms of like, I don't, it, sort of like this higher ideal or whatever, but it's not that old. And like the the human the very human need to see what happens next with this thing that may be just sort of like peripheral to your interests,
right,
it goes past your, like, this is me, I like this and this. It goes right past that part of your brain and just shoots for like the, like, ooh, what's gonna happen next, uh
right.
part of it, that's just, yeah. Anyway, it's a total hack. And I think that this topic is so interesting to artists because we are sort of beholden to post on Instagram to get our stuff out there to then sell work or get jobs.
It is. I mean, it goes back if Instagram or models like Instagram don't work any longer to get our satellite going,
Yeah.
um, we go back to this like regionalist model, which is like not
Yeah.
exciting. A lot of like why I am still in Memphis was based on the faith that I'd be able to get my work out of Memphis because
Yeah.
Memphis does not have the economy to support me.
Right.
Um, and honestly, when you get an artist who has such a specific style as me, you don't want 10 jobs in the same city in a year.
Yeah.
You know, it gets gross. It's too much of your shit
Saturation.
in the
Yeah.
same area. And so it is interesting to see what the long-term effect of this will be for like artists and regional art, and if it goes back to like the old model or if it mutates. Um,
Yeah. Hopefully it'll mutate into a new exciting thing again, like, Instagram was in like 2013 or 14. I just always, you know, as humans, we tend to play this game of like, oh, if I would have just, such and such. And mine is like, if I would have just been making good art in 2013 and 14, then maybe I would be at a more stable place in my career. But
yeah, if I had just
so it
painted
goes.
trains when I was 7, I'd be like
Yeah, right, right,
triple OG.
right.
Um, no, I feel you, man. It's an interesting thing. But yeah, I'm thinking about it a lot because I got the solo show coming up, and it's the first time in a while that I'm like, oh, I'm going to do physical posters.
Hell
Like I
yeah,
can't rely solely on like internet promotion because it just might not have the same gravity that it would have 5 years ago.
sure. So this solo show, let's talk about that for a second. Is this Iliumpta?
It is, yeah.
Hell yeah. Will you tell the audience about that?
Iliumpta is basically a retelling of Homer's The Iliad set in this like make-believe county of Mississippi called Iliumpta, Ilium being like the Latinization of Troy and from the Iliad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about fatalism in the American South and its comparisons to like the sandaled heroes of yore and how Um, Philosophies that start with "don't leave during a hurricane" might not be like the best advice. I mean, when I was young, we used to have hurricane parties when a hurricane would come. I grew up on the coast.
Yeah.
Um, but just like this sort of idea that like in the South, I think we confuse stoicism with heroism, where like if there's a problem, it's more heroic to stand and like endure it than to find a clever solution to stop it from being a problem anymore. So a lot of the paintings are like sort of mashups of stories from the Iliad, but given Southern iconography. He'll be wearing like a Piggly Wiggly t-shirt, and or he'll be in an outboard motor instead of like a classical Greek trireme.
Yeah.
And so it's a way just to pay like homage to the South and to show how much I love the South, but also like show some of its problems and like in its uh drama, we have a lot of like weird toxic masculinity that is tied to being
Yep.
like what a good man should be.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is like endurance. And so a lot of the
Hmm.
work kind of ranges around that topic.
Nice. Um, so I'm gonna try something here. Share a screen, and let's see. I just want to show people. It's the vases, right? That's
The
what I
vases are
the
vases
vases.
are wait, I'll say it the way you said it. The vases
No.
are that lead ups to it. So they'll be in the show, but those are kind of thought of as like relics. Those stories that are on the vases aren't from the Iliad, but they would be stories that were known by the people in the Iliad.
Oh, okay,
So they're
nice.
like relics from Iliumpta.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna screen share real quick. Let's see here. We'll do this. And I mean, we can do this pretty quick. Just we'll go through all three of them if you don't mind, and just sort of maybe lay out the synopsis of each one.
Sure.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet, nice.
So they're red from top to bottom. So the top is the engine of the boat cranking, and then you
Right
see
here,
the very
or at the
top.
very top. Okay.
Yeah. And then you see the
Oh, I
bloodhound
see. Okay.
catching a scent. The next part
Yeah.
is the men on the boat chasing love. You see the heart in the center.
Yeah.
And so they go out to like do this hunt for a woman, which is like in its very like verb problematic. So they go and they find the Medusa. They're thrashed by the Medusa. They drown, and then there's an altar at the bottom of the skull with a Dale Earnhardt hat, a magnolia flower, some whiskey, and hot chips, like in memorial for them. And then
Right.
Evan Rude is a play on the outboard engine that's called Evan Rude, but it's also like a male's name and the term rude. So it's
Yeah.
just playing on like their idea to go out and like hunt girls
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah.
was
Which
problematic from the get-go.
which essentially is sort of what the whole story of the at least the Trojan War was all about, right?
Yeah. But also the story of Medusa is like a tragic story of a woman getting blamed for something that wasn't her fault. And then you get to be a hero if you kill this woman who's like really done nothing wrong and
Yeah.
been punished terribly by it.
Nice. I mean this is a very complex idea, and I just love it. I think this is great.
Thanks,
Um,
man.
yeah. And then this one here.
This is a story of Icarus. So at the top you see the sun and you see Icarus and Daedalus flying.
Yeah.
Then you see Icarus in his Dale Earnhardt hat getting too close to the sun, falling. And then the next panel is life going on. He died. It's a tragic moment for Daedalus, of course, but it
Yeah.
doesn't affect the fishermen. And Daytona is a reference to um, Dale Earnhardt and where he passed away, flying too close to the sun. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
sort of Southern mythology mixed with a Greek tale.
yeah. Yeah. This one for me was a little easier to understand because I knew that Dale Earnhardt crashed in Daytona. And obviously the metaphor of like Icarus getting too close to the sun, people talk about that all the time, where you fly too high, and or you're a little too risky, and your wings get melted away, I guess.
Right.
And
The
so,
last
yeah, go ahead.
the last one is the story of Orpheus. And so at the top, he's on his horse, walking all the way to the Hades. He takes the boat of Charon to take him to Hades and Persephone. He sings for them,
Hmm.
convinces them to let him take his wife, Eurydice, back out of hell.
Yeah,
But in that tragic instance, he turns around, looks back. That was the one thing he wasn't allowed to do, is look back. So his
yeah,
insecurity got the best of him. Eurydice is taken back to hell, and he dies alone. And I wrote Hank because he's kind of like the ancient rendition of a lonely country singer.
for sure. Yeah, I love it. I love that story too. Have you heard of this is kind of a tangent, but have you heard of Anais Mitchell?
Oh yeah,
She
yeah, yeah.
she has an
Uh,
album called Hades Town, I think it's called.
yeah, yeah. Way down under the ground. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
yeah, hell
that.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not too weird if people are listening on their phone.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to get people to check out the YouTube, you
Ah, smart.
know. And so another piece of your work that I was really interested in, that really struck me, was the grief manual. Would you mind talking
Oh,
about that?
yeah. The Grief Manual is a 2-year project I made after the death of my mom and finished a few months after the death of my dad. And it's just a series of like semi-linear comics that all deal with the grieving process. I wrote it starting about 2 weeks after my mom died. And then I'd come out with individual comics for the better part of 2 years. And at the end, I turned it into a graphic novel and released them. But it was a way for me to process my grief and hopefully connect with others who have had similar situations or,
Yeah.
um, but
First of all, I think it's a beautiful way to process grief, and a super smart way too. Um, just
thanks,
using
man.
what you got. And I think grief is one of those things that's maybe the trickiest human emotion, um, because it doesn't ever happen on schedule, I guess, and it
Right.
comes and goes, and sometimes you're like, I'm past this, and then the next moment you'll be tearing up for seemingly no reason at all. And yeah, I think it's very special, man. So um,
Appreciate that. That's a
yeah,
lot of the reason why I didn't write it in a perfectly linear timeline. I wanted to feel a little disjunctive because I remember, there were days where I felt good, and then the next day I'd be sort of like falling apart in the kitchen while I'm cooking pancakes for no reason because
yeah,
like a
yeah,
smell reminded me of something. And so yeah, I wanted it to feel like that. I remember like when she died, I Googled like how to get past grief. And there
yeah.
were like two schools of thought. There was something that was extremely clinical and it sounds like it was written by a medical science school.
Hmm.
And then there was like Oprah book club type things that were like really like felt condescending, like it was too sweet
Yeah,
of
yeah,
tone for me. And
yeah,
so I wanted something in the middle that if I had to deal with grief, what would help me? And so that's what the grief manual is. It's I think saccharine at sometimes, but also it can be sardonic and mean and cold and um confused. I think just being able to admit that it's confusing
yeah.
is like a big part of it. Um but
And
yeah, man, thanks for bringing it up.
yeah, of course. And that's kind of what grief is all those emotions wrapped into an event or a loss, you know.
Right.
And I mean, honestly, I think you're helping people understand it in a more holistic way, because like you were saying, you had sort of two options on offer from Google. It was like this super cold and clinical thing, and then this super like saccharine Oprah's book club thing, and neither of those are quite the whole truth. It's somewhere in between,
Yeah.
and
It's
it's
something that
never linear.
contradicts itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Thanks for talking about that. So what has art taught what has making art taught you about yourself,
Oh,
if anything?
I'm sure it's taught me a lot. I think it's taught me that like we were talking about with mural installs, I think it taught me that like upbringing has more to do with who you are than you ever want to admit. I think
Yeah.
I do have like this weird Protestant work ethic in me. I like drawing things that are time expensive. I like
Yeah.
filling up small space. I like working on a big wall. I like doing things that feels like work. And I think some of that is like growing up with the background noise that art is invalid in some way. And
Mhm.
so like if it comes off easy, it feels like I'm cheating people of their money. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
something I'm working through. But like I'm always jealous of people who can do sparse designs that work in a space
Yeah.
because there's this weird, and I'm not religious in any way, but there's this weird Christian guilt that fills me if I don't like really like overproduce in a space because I feel like you're not, it's not, the design isn't enough. You also need to have had me in the space working longer for
Yeah.
me to deserve the money. And so
Yeah.
I think art made me aware of that, and then now it's something I can unpack and hopefully like um reduce its power over me. But I wouldn't
Yeah.
have thought about that had it not been artwork.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I keep using that word interesting, but it's weird how like sometimes we don't realize the history of thought and just behavior that we're swimming in just by being born to whom and where we were born, you know?
Right.
And that just sort of just becomes a part of you. And, you get to be, 30 something and you're like, holy shit, what's this doing here? You take inventory and you're like, what is this?
Right. And I think I had my head down so hard on being like, I'm not one of you when I was growing up. It's like, I'm not Southern. I'm like, I'm a man of the world. I have in the internet in 2001.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
that like my first thing to do when I could was I got out of Mississippi. And the first thing I did when I graduated was I got out of the States and I moved to Korea for 4 years.
Hmm.
And all of it was like me sort of like denying that I was a part of this thing that I at the time didn't like at all. And I still see all the problems in the South, but I'm also like
Sure.
a little more like sober to the fact that I'm like deeply Southern, and you can be deeply Southern without just being like a mass of toxic traits that a 17-year-old boy hates.
Yeah, yeah.
And it
Yeah,
just took me
100%.
like double that amount of time to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like I can relate. Moving to Denver, I was asserting my individuality, right? And sort of like in my mind separating myself from where I came from. Um, but even that idea of individuality has been handed down to me because we're from America,
Yeah,
and and so it's just this funny thing to realize that like, oh, all these ideas I had are just sort of a part of me, and I didn't have very much control over um whether I rejected them or accepted them. And now just seeing that, I guess you're able to see a little bit more of reality or something like that, and you can accept it and work with it rather than just having it be running as like some subconscious program that is guiding your life.
absolutely. The one bonus of your older stages of life is hopefully self-awareness because you're losing your ability to be good as a linebacker. So hopefully you gain something.
Yeah. Yeah. um have you changed your approach to art at all over the years?
Mm, I think I fought with the idea of being a studio artist for a long time. It took me a long time to like painting on canvas. I did it in
Really?
college, and then as soon as I got into graffiti or street art, I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I'll do digital illustrations and I'll do murals, and I don't want to touch that middle zone. I don't like that
Hmm.
middle zone at all. And then this last year, I've had to really focus on like learning to enjoy the studio process. And
Hmm.
I think what I didn't like about it was I was never in a rhythm because I tried to do it for a week and then I'd go off and do a mural job. And I'd do it for a week and then I'd have like an album cover to do instead, and I'd do that. And so I just never developed a practice. And I think establishing a working practice in the studio and putting the time in to make it something you're not fighting with entirely has been a big change in my career. And it's something I can see as I get older. You don't want to be on a ladder when you're in your late 50s, probably.
Yeah,
So it's something I think more about how to expand my arsenal to be viable as I do get older. And I don't necessarily want to do manual labor. And I
for
hope
sure.
that's a while off, but it's something you need to have built before you need it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. That's smart. Um, so it's so funny that we've been talking sort of about murals versus studios. I thought of this idea. I don't know where I got it from, but this might be cool. It might be silly, but it's a new section of the show that I like to call "Who Would Win," uh, and why. And so, who would win and why? A mural artist versus studio artist.
Who'd win and what?
Just who would win?
Mm.
I don't know. See, this is where it's like, maybe I haven't thought this out all the way, but yeah,
Um,
just trying to see if I can elicit uh,
I
an
mean, my
interesting or funny
loyalties
response.
to mural artists. So without knowing if it's not knowing what the actual confrontation is, I'll say obviously a mural artist would win. Um,
And why?
although at whatever comes up, at fist fighting, at performative dance, I don't know. Probably at doing emails and stuff, a studio artist is much better.
Mm-hmm.
But who would win at getting my heart would be a mural artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. W- why would they win? Or what are qualities about a mural artist that would have them
It's just
give
my
them the
first
advantage?
it's just my first love.
Got you.
I do everything else so I can paint murals.
Hell yeah.
Um, Murals are the end all and be all to me. I think that's where I'm happiest. They involve travel.
Hmm.
They get you out of your house. They involve the community. They get you with your friends. Me at a mural festival is probably the happiest you'll see me, probably the most comfortable you'll see me. Um, a studio, the best thing that can happen is you have an opening that does well. But for that opening to do well, you worked for 8 months and then you get these 3 hours that you hope are nice.
Yeah.
Um, there's nothing that pays a higher rate of like happiness per hour than murals.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's
Thanks.
who would win. Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks for playing along with that. Does making art buy happiness,
Does it buy happiness?
or does it create happiness?
I don't know what creates happiness. I think it creates an opportunity for it.
Hmm.
It's cool to be your own boss, right? It has its own stresses. It's weird that the money isn't even. You get paid a whole lot on a Tuesday and then you have no money on a Friday.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I this could be an anecdote that is completely like false, but I heard once that they did research about jobs relating to happiness. And artist was put in there to see if they thought they might have a corollary with depression because that's kind of the stereotype, right?
Yeah.
And they found if anything, artists are average with happiness to job ratio,
Hmm.
maybe a little bit above,
Nice.
maybe a little happier than normal. The two jobs that correlated with depression was um, abstract mathematicians
Whoa.
and oboe players.
What?
And the theory was that they're both jobs that require a high amount of technical knowledge, a high amount of like invested interest, and it has a very low amount of people who can appreciate your
Yeah.
technical knowledge.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so like depression comes from like working really hard and not getting feedback,
Yeah.
not getting
Yeah.
positive feedback for all the amount of work you do. So I think in that way, a muralist is one of the happiest versions of an artist because you're constantly getting feedback. You get people taking photos in front of the wall, people come up and they compliment you. If you're a plumber, you can be the best plumber in the world. Very few people compliment you.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we're pretty lucky as far as like job to happiness, like opportunities um,
I agree.
go.
I agree. Yeah, I just wanted to rephrase the question of like, does money buy happiness? And most people say no, and um, it's just one of the. It's just a question that I thought, oh, how can I change this into something art related? And so, thanks for your thoughtful response on that. That's a new one I'm trying out. So appreciate that.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
Let's see. Oh, so what is the hardest thing about being an artist that most people don't understand?
That most people don't understand. I think personally, the hardest part for me is putting yourself out there for opportunities. Like, I think I have this, I grew up where I grew up, and it's well documented in this podcast, but like, I sort of grew up with this sense of meritocracy for all things. Like, you should never ask for opportunities. You should never like send an email and being like, did you know I could collaborate with you on this brand project? Did you know I could work in this mural festival? That just seems like a huge sin. Like it seems insane to me. And it's something I've had to really work through because the truth is you need to push for yourself and you need to advocate for yourself. And meritocracy is like a cool like daydream, but it's not really how anything works. Like you want to be as
Yeah.
good as you can to be able to get an opportunity when it arrives, but the opportunities don't necessarily come to you. You have to go petition for yourself in a way that is like incredibly uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
Like I pitched to a skateboard company a couple weeks ago and we're going to make a skateboard deck now. But I emailed them and that seems insane. Like I wouldn't have been able to do it 4 years ago. And it's something that I have to keep working on and stretching my comfort zone in. But I think that's the hardest part of being an artist, at least to me, is petitioning for yourself, advocating for yourself, because it seems counterintuitive to being humble and just having a hard work ethic.
Yeah. Man, you're shining some light on some things about myself too that I didn't really realize. It's hard. That's hard for me too. Reaching out to people. I think same but different. Oh, stop, Io. It's my dog. Uh, is like, yeah, I don't know. It feels hard to be like, hey, over here, look at me. It's
Yeah,
like that's sort of, I don't know. It's just weird. It's a weird thing to do, to advocate for yourself and to be like, look how great I am, everyone.
yeah. It's
Don't you want this? Where really, like you were saying, if meritocracy were real, we could all just put our heads down, and the people who liked our work would automatically see it because the algorithm is fair, and like we have all these new tools. But yeah, it's the world's definitely not set up that way,
it's not.
especially the art world.
It's not. And you have to, it's nonstop. There's not a moment where you can really take a break as an artist. I think that's hard too. Like,
Hmm.
whereas like all jobs are hard in different ways, but usually you have a job interview and then you have your job and you have to perform your job, but you don't have another job interview. I feel
Yeah,
like as an artist, you have a job interview every day you wake up.
yeah,
Like every day is an email or an email you're sending out where you're like, I'm interviewing for this job, I'm petitioning for this job. And that's, it's a grind. It's hard for me to like really like accept that when I'm 60, I'll probably still be having to petition for work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, it's terrifying on the wrong day.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, thank you for that perspective there. Very brutal fact about being an artist. A couple of them. Couple brutal facts. So let's talk about AI for a minute. It's interesting. Before the show or before I press record, I said, "Is there anything you want to talk about?" And you brought this up, and it was actually a question on uh, the notes that I have. What are your what are your just general thoughts on AI art and the future of the art world?
I think I'm not against it. I'm going to say things that I think are going to sound negative, but I don't think you can be against it. I think it's an
Right.
inevitable thing and it's here and it's not going away. I think a lot of artists will use it as a shortcut, the way like I use the iPad as a shortcut. I don't have to pencil and then ink and then scan in and then digitally color. Like you
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
what technology you have. Um, I do think it's going to reduce jobs. Like I
Yeah.
think anything that sort of democratizes art reduces art jobs. Like if you were an oil painter in the 1800s, you would have been pretty like downtrodden when the camera came out.
Yeah.
Like and it did take jobs. There's far less oil painting jobs than there's ever been in the history of oil painting right now.
Yeah.
Um, and that's going to happen here. It's seismic. Illustration is going to be a different thing. And I don't think we're going to be able to charge the same prices that we used to charge. And I think
Mm.
that's going to be tough. And the same thing with my friends who are photographers. They've been lowering their prices on certain jobs for like the last 20 years, ever since iPhones became better and better at taking
Yeah.
photos. And so we have to adapt to that if we want to stay in a career. But why would you do graphic design with old stationary tools when Adobe Suite exists, right? Why would you
Totally.
illustrate when you can generate?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it calls into question like how we build. I can't think in terms of like I can outcraft something anymore. I can't.
Right.
Like people like are real nice, and when you post AI generated things, they're like, it's not as good as yours, and you're like, bullshit. It's like way better. It's like
Yeah.
infinitely better. I can't draw like that. That's
Yeah.
crazy good.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to be about ideas and productions. Like even we were talking about like Instagram. Instagram favors people who can do full productions over who can do static artwork, right? If you have good
Yeah.
audio, good lighting, good visuals, good narrative, if you can
Yeah.
make small movies, you're going to do better than someone who can make a drawing, in
Right.
general, right? And I think that's sort of you can take that metaphor and stretch it out to like being a full-time artist. You're going to have to be able to do a lot of things to explain why you deserve to get paid for this when so much can be done by every human on earth now.
Right.
Like I cannot out illustrate my sister. My sister's never drawn before.
Right.
Um,
Although yours might seem a little more unique. Um,
to a point, but like
yeah.
think about how much visual AI has improved in 6 months.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's
There,
insane.
it's my uniqueness is not going to last.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so that's what you have left after my uniqueness is you're like, well, you're a brand, sort of, but it's going to be really important to explain why your brand is worthwhile. And that comes from storytelling, and that comes from like lifestyle, and that comes from things that are not the image. The image is going to be like largely secondary because an image can be made now. Like
Yeah.
an image is not that important as a distinguishing factor. The image is, a compound sentence written into Adobe.
Wow. Yeah. That's quotable for sure. Compound sentence written into Adobe. Um, what about murals though? So there's still that final frontier of like even if you can design a mural with AI, you still have to be able to go out, execute with either spray paint or brush on a large surface area. And so far from the little that I know about AI, it hasn't become like embodied yet enough to where a robot could walk up and spray and make it look good.
No,
Um,
for now it's still I think artists who are egoless, artists who are craftsmen will do well in this age. Like
yeah,
I think a lot of people come with images that they want and they won't need an artist to tell them what image they want. They'll have
yeah,
it picked out.
yeah,
And I think people who can paint anything and are like willing to work like that will do
yeah.
really well. I have friends here in Memphis they use AI to make all their imagery. They do it to like you work for an asparagus shop, types in asparagus vector, Memphis skyline, um, chromatic blue. Gets the image, makes it a mural. They love it more than anything I could ever do. So I
Yeah,
think that will still happen. As a craftsman, muralist will still be around. As like brands, I don't know. I hope we're still around because that's what I am. I can't do anything with spray paint. I have a very specific style. And more than that, I have an ego. I want to do the things that I want to do.
yeah,
And for whatever reason, I think that's important. And I don't know where that fits in. I'm actively nervous about it, but it's something that you just have to like live through and see what happens, I guess.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I was definitely when it sort of first came out a year and a half ago or whatever, I was pretty, you know, it definitely struck me in the limbic system, I was like, what the hell? What is this? It's and I felt, over time I've sort of softened my opinion on it because it's like, well, what are we going to do? Are you going to stop technology and human progress? When has that ever worked? No. So, I've come to accept it. Um, I don't know if I don't know if I necessarily like it, but it is what it is, and like you were saying, we'll have to adapt and
we'll
I
have to
guess,
adapt. And I try not to fall like I have that like I can feel the oldness inside of me saying like the old
same,
barometers of success were better.
same, yeah,
Even though I know like deep in my heart they were just as arbitrary and based on like the time I was born in.
right,
And
yeah,
so it'll be interesting to me seeing the kids who grew up with AI from childhood, like the kids
yeah,
who are like 5 now, how they will feel about hand-drawn work when they're adults. If they'll even care about it whatsoever, it will mean nothing. The way I don't care if you don't do your graphic design on Adobe, if you cut it all out by hand and scan it in and do all your typography with letter sets and stuff, like
yeah,
I don't care. I'm just reading the magazine.
yeah,
Magazine is antiquated.
yeah,
So it'll
yeah.
be interesting to see what the world thinks of us, like hand cavemen in 20 years.
Yeah, you wonder. I don't know. My mind always zooms way the fuck out about all this, but you wonder what type of effects that could have hundreds of thousands of years on even like having hands to do things with. Maybe it's just it's all about the mind, and I think the AI argument could be boiled down into, well, is it the image itself that is primary, or is it the process that one goes through that we like,
I think
is
it
it
has to be, it's the narrative with the image. But if we're talking about process, if we want to stand on that hill and die there, we're
mhm.
basically the Amish. We're picking like a certain time when
Yeah,
technology was ideal. Like I'm not
Yeah,
mad
yeah.
at my iPad. I'm not mad at like
My horse.
factory made paint. I'm not mad
Yeah.
at like gold, like Montana gold spray paint.
Right, right.
And I remember when I was coming up in spray paint, people would be like, you're cheating because I use Crayon my whole life and I
Oh,
use stock caps and like
oh,
it
okay.
was more difficult and it took
Yeah,
more
yeah.
skill. And
Yeah.
of course you can do great, but you're using this modern technology. And now like I'm confronted with like, oh, I'm the old man holding a can of Krylon paint, being like,
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
this modern technology.
Yeah.
It's not fair because I've spent a lot of time getting good at something that's now antiquated.
Yeah. And
Um,
I'm sure you heard this growing up. I know that I did, but life's not fair, like
yeah,
that old saying. And so, yeah, you're right. I think we just have to evolve. I think what I meant too by like process, it's more like for me, I think you're sort of for anyone who's starting out in AI and just typing in a sentence, it's not a craft anymore. It's not a thing where you sit alone with like your energy. Well, I guess I don't know. See, now I'm already
it is.
contradicting myself. It is, yeah. Um, yeah. It's just a different type of medium, I guess.
It's a different type, and we're reticent about it. But
Yeah. It's more verbal, I guess. It's more on the verbal side of the brain. That then
it
makes an image.
but then like that's how I come my image is always. It's like I have a verbal sentence in my head to start.
Really?
All my work is narrative, so it all starts with like some sense of a narrative. Um, so it's not, I don't know. It's not entirely different. It's explosive. It's going to change things. And we're focused on these little nuances about our individual careers. But like, if I check Facebook, I see 20,000 people fighting over an image of Taylor Swift holding a giant Star of David that is completely made up AI image. The
Yeah,
fact
yeah.
that it's going to change like world politics and like faith
Exactly.
in image is so much more of a larger conversation than like it ruining my little career. Like
Totally.
it's gonna be to the point where you go to events just to know it happened.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a good thing though too. Um, After all the COVID shit, like we're more used to being just like staring at our screens than ever.
It's
And
interesting, man. It
yeah,
could make us more regional again because you don't trust things outside of your region.
it's
So
a
it
good
goes
point.
back to that. Um, I don't know. We'll live through it. That's one thing that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. As long as it doesn't get to AGI, um, and then takes over, and we're living in the Matrix.
Yeah, that'd be lame, bro.
We don't have to go there. Uh, all right. So, last question: do you have any advice for people who are just starting out and just getting into murals?
Just getting into murals. Reach out to people. When I started, my whole career started because I reached out to someone who knew what they were doing and they greeted me with kindness. Um, don't be shy about it. Be honest. Say you don't know yet and you want to know things. And
Yeah,
I found that most people are extremely kind with that. And if the first person who you talk to isn't, then just the next one will be. Um, but yeah, I would say just if you're hungry enough, the one lacking ingredient usually is community. You don't want to do it by yourself. Go ahead and try to meet some people.
yeah. Well, beautiful, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, this is a dope conversation. I feel like you brought your A game, and I really appreciate that. So,
Oh man, I don't know about that. I appreciate you. Feels like I talked way too much.
no, that's the whole point of it. So your solo show, real quick, as a parting shot, where can people see that?
Iliumpta will open February 9th from 6 to 9 at Crosstown Arts in Memphis, Tennessee.
Hell yeah,
And I'll be posting a whole lot about it. So if you can't make it, check the IG at
sweet.
Birdcap.
At Birdcap on IG. Thanks so much, man.
Appreciate you, bro.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you again for listening to another episode of RTAF Podcast. If you are interested in supporting the Patreon, that address is patreon.com/RTAF Podcast. And I want to thank all my patrons. You guys keep this engine running. I couldn't do it without you. Go over there and check out the tiers I have available. Thank you again for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. Do all those little things that help get RTAF into the consciousness of more and more people. Shout.